And this is an informational hearing by the Senate Committee on Transportation and Housing and the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I chair. Senator Bell chairs the former, and he will be here shortly to have a few words, or to say a few words to you as well. So thank you for being here, and thank you to the members of the committees who are here. I think this is going to be a very interesting and enlightening opportunity to learn about what is going on in the world that we may not ever have thought of, let alone understood. So again, welcome to you all and to our distinguished guests who have traveled to be here with us today. I know that we have witnesses who've joined us from across the country, including industry leaders from back east, where I'm told it's warmer than it is here right now, but there's no global climate change impacting weather, but we're glad to have you anyway. Researchers, public servants, and small business owners, and I would be remiss if I didn't extend a personal welcome to community members who have joined us from Santa Barbara, which is my district. And knowing how hard it is to get here from there, I really do doubly appreciate your interest in being with us. Today's hearing is entitled Telematics 101, How Much Your Car Knows About You, which, when you think about it, is a little scary. For some of us, we're anxious to know what it is we can know about our cars, especially if we're not inherently inclined to know much more than to push the button to start the car. And now, of course, we can do that without keys. So beyond that, some of us, and perhaps myself included, are somewhat unknowing about what cars can do, and I would suspect that even a lot more people are unknowing about what cars know about us. So it's a new and exciting technology without a doubt. It might be a new concept to some and not to others, but let me just sort of define it very simply as a group of technologies that collect and transmit useful data to and from an automobile. So that's the basic definition, and I'm sure we'll hear much more about this and a little bit more from the folks who have a much more sophisticated definition and knowledge about what today's vehicles can and cannot do, know and cannot know, and some would argue can think or not think. I think, though, that definition is probably a good place to start. And again, the vehicles that we see on today's roadways are becoming increasingly intertwined with computer technology. I'm told there are some vehicles that have 10, 20, 30 different computers on board as a way to sort of direct our driving habits and the information that is now knowable as a result of technology. But not only are we increasing computer technology on vehicles themselves, the roads that we drive on are also being retrofitted with computer technology to make driving hopefully a safer and more efficient experience for all of us, which I think is a good thing. The Federal Department of Transportation has estimated that up to 80% of vehicle collisions may be prevented by some of these new telematics technologies that are capable of sharing real-time data between cars and roadway infrastructure. If such an astonishing figure were realized, that would translate into millions of fewer crashes and tens of thousands of lives saved. That's an extraordinary and very hopeful possibility that I am anxious for us to discuss as well. So I don't know if telematics can do anything about the potholes and the more low-tech transportation challenges we face in California, but these safety improvements could genuinely and truly revolutionize the driving experience for all of us in an unmistakably good way. But again, these new technologies come with a cost. In today's world, data is a very valuable commodity, and these telematic technologies generate a huge amount of data, including information about where and how we drive. I can imagine, as I'm sure you can, that this data could be quite valuable to a number of people or entities. And if this sensitive data isn't properly protected from misuse, it could really, truly, genuinely erode our privacy. And again, as I reiterate whenever I talk about privacy in California, we take our privacy so seriously, consider it so dear, that it is written specifically within the fundamental rights that Californians have, written right into our Constitution. Not implied, but expressly stated that among our fundamental rights are life, liberty, property, and privacy. And so we have, I think, a real responsibility here in California to recognize and do everything we can to protect that right of privacy, while at the same time recognizing that there are opportunities out there to accomplish things through these new technologies that we never would have dreamed possible. So, for those who are concerned that they're being constantly monitored, some of these technologies can be a bit unnerving. Some of these systems automatically track your travel habits and offer helpful tips about getting to the places that you normally go, like work or home. The problem, though, is that if you're not planning to go to work or home and your computer, your car is telling you where it thinks you should be going and how you should be getting there. Whether you decide one day that rather than go to Starbucks for your coffee, you want to go to Pete's or Coffee Bean or your local Joe, and your car tells you you're going the wrong way. So, and these are things that actually I know, having talked to people, they've actually experienced. So, I'm sure for most of those for whom this has happened, or just the notion it could happen, it's a particularly disturbing thought, especially, as I mentioned, when you haven't asked the car for directions. So another issue that's recently come to the forefront is the issue of cybersecurity. An article that appeared in Wired magazine just last week noted that cyber vulnerabilities in telematics systems may render thousands of trucks, buses, and ambulances vulnerable to hackers. Last year, reporters from the same magazine experienced these vulnerabilities firsthand as hackers took control of a vehicle they were riding in while it was traveling down an interstate highway. There is also a risk that these new computer-based vehicles will disrupt traditional automotive sector economies as repair work shifts from mechanical to computer-based systems. We have to ask ourselves, how will this shift impact neighborhood repair shops and auto parts stores? Will it limit the choices today's drivers have when it comes to maintaining their vehicles? And these are questions that our panel will be looking at and addressing shortly. So today's hearing is organized into two parts, and I can tell you this was very difficult to try to take this massive issue and try to create some semblance of simplicity in it. And the first part, though, will cover the basics of this new technology, the benefit it brings to the drivers of today and tomorrow, and the exciting research being done to realize the safety improvements that I mentioned earlier. The second panel will discuss some of the challenges this new technology presents to both our automotive industry and to our long-held values, such as privacy. And as with most new technologies, we as policymakers have the responsibility to figure out how to balance the potential benefits against the downside risks, and this hearing is a first step towards doing just that. So without further ado, and I guess my co-chair here is not here, we will then get started, but I want to thank all of you who have chosen to join us today and look forward to a robust and constructive dialogue. And I assume when Senator Bell gets here, we will allow him to interrupt and have a few words, as I know in his position as chair, he has a number of thoughts as well on this particular subject. So without further ado, I'd like to call up our first panel, Kurt Augustine, Damon Porter, Steve Carlson, and Dr. Stephen Schladover, if you gentlemen would like to come up, and Tim Tobin, as well as David Strickland. And we do have place settings. I guarantee you there are no ejector buttons. And while you gentlemen are getting situated, is there anyone here on the panel, here on the dais who would like to make an opening statement or a remark or two? All right. In that case, gentlemen, let's start with Mr. Augustine, who is the Director of Policy and Government Affairs with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, and Mr. Tim Tobin, who is a partner in Hogan and Lovells. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. Thank you. Madam Chair and members, thank you for the opportunity to address you on this very important topic. And you, Senator Jackson, actually used the word exciting, and that was actually part of what I was going to start off with. This is an incredibly exciting time within the auto industry, and in fact, I've been told by executives that perhaps it is the most exciting time in the last 50 years to be part of the auto industry. In addition to the telematics issue that we're going to talk about today, we are on the verge of tremendous breakthroughs, both on the alternative fuel vehicles, clean power technologies, autonomous vehicles, and the safety controls that are within vehicles that we'll hear some discussion of today. I'm here to kind of lay out kind of how our automotive panel will be discussed today. I'm just doing some very brief remarks, and I am with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, which represents 12 of the major manufacturers throughout the world. It's approximately 75% of the automobiles sold here in California. And my colleague Damon Porter is with the other major auto manufacturer association, and he will talk about his association. But between the two of our associations, we represent every major manufacturer of vehicles that are sold here in the state. He will make a presentation regarding some of the very specific questions that you have posed to us. And then we're very lucky today to have two nationally known experts, both on technology, safety, and all sorts of data security and regulation, Mr. Tobin and Mr. Strickland. After Mr. Porter makes his remarks, then Mr. Tobin, who is one of the principal co-authors of the most unique privacy principles ever written by any industry group. He will discuss those privacy principles and how our companies put those in play. And at this point, then, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Porter, unless you have any other questions, Senator.
And it was pointed out that this is a panel of all gentlemen. I am quite aware of that. I do hope that going forward we see more women who will be joining or sitting with you at the table to have these discussions. Duly noted, Senator Allen, and I will admit I did observe that when this panel was first created. But
I'm watching you, Hannah Beth.
I know, and I'm watching me too. So at any rate, please go ahead, and I know that you'll be chatting with us about what some of the information is that you do collect, are planning to collect, and how you address the various privacy aspects of this information. So I know that is part of the discussion, and I know I'm particularly interested in those issues. So without further ado, Mr. Tobin, or who is the next speaker? Mr. Porter. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Senator Jackson and members of the Senate Committee on Transportation and the Senate Committee on Judiciary. I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing for informational purposes to discuss automobile data collection. Again, for the record, my name is Damon Porter. I'm the Director of State Government Affairs for Global Automakers, and I am joined by the Honorable David Strickland, who is the former administrator of NHTSA. He will be here to answer any technical substantive questions that we may have at the conclusion of my statement. Global Automakers, we represent international automobile manufacturers. We design, we build, and of course we sell cars and light trucks in the United States. Our companies have invested $4.3 billion in the state of California. We have facilities. We directly employ 11,000 Californians, and we sell 57% of the new motor vehicles in California as of last year in 2015. Combined, our member companies operate more than 95 production, design, research and development, sales, finance, and other facilities throughout California, as well as some of the premier North American headquarters for some of our companies. Global Automakers and the other auto manufacturers are committed to creating the safest, cleanest, and most technologically advanced vehicles on the road. Vehicles in the marketplace today are offering an increasing amount of innovative technologies that make the driving experience safer, more environmentally friendly, more environmentally responsible, and certainly more enjoyable. We do look to a time in the very near future when these advanced and active technologies will save more lives, increase mobility, and move us towards sustainable transportation systems. The level and complexity of technology in our automobiles grows continually every day. As automakers manufacture vehicles incorporating more advanced technologies, these vehicles become more connected, privacy and cybersecurity concerns definitely emerge. Global automakers and our companies recognize these concerns and have been taking proactive measures to address them. We are pleased that California has presented us with this opportunity to discuss the important subject of vehicle data collection and privacy protection. Global automakers wants to work with all industry leaders, legislators, regulators, and other stakeholders to address this issue. Our goal in California and elsewhere is to create public policy that improves motor vehicle safety, encourages technological innovation, and protects our planet. It is important for the members of the California State Legislature to understand how and why we collect, use, and in some instances share the data that's generated in our vehicles. So the principal question is, what data is collected by today's automobiles? Today's new vehicles contain innovative technologies that deliver substantial benefits for consumers by greatly enhancing the safety, the performance, and the environmental impact of our vehicles, while providing navigation and other valuable information services, theft protection, and diagnostic capabilities. I want to make it very clear that most of the data that we collect is not personally identifiable. That is, the information is not linked and is not linkable either to the vehicle from which the information was retrieved or to the vehicle owner. Personally identifiable information includes geolocation, biometric, and driver behavior information. I would like to give a few real-world examples of what information is being collected in our vehicles, where such services are available, and what are the benefits. First, geolocation data is necessary for navigation. It also can save lives in the event of a crash by transmitting location data to emergency responders or roadside assistance providers to quickly aid vehicles in need. The sooner we can get to first responders at the scene, the more quickly they will be able to triage the situation. Another real-world example is biometric data that can be used to monitor a driver's to gauge a driver's eyes in terms of their fatigue, as well as sound and alarm if they should happen to be distracted or drowsy or fall asleep. Driver data behavior measures speed, braking, and other performance data points critical to enabling advanced traction, cruise control, anti-lock brakes, advanced airbags, and other onboard diagnostics. One of the most exciting developments is connected vehicles. Vehicles that talk to each other, to the infrastructure, and even to your mobile device. The life-saving capability requires data. Connected vehicles are expected to revolutionize highway safety and potentially save thousands of lives per year by avoiding crashes. Vehicle-to-vehicle technology, or as what we call V2V, allows connected vehicles to wirelessly communicate with each other to warn drivers of possible dangers. NHTSA has initiated rulemaking on this that would require new vehicles to be equipped with this safety technology, and the industry is working collaboratively to plan for the successful deployment of connected cars. We recognize that this connectivity and technology can create potential risk. It is impossible to talk about the need to protect privacy of vehicle data without addressing cybersecurity. To that end, our automakers have established an ISAC, or an Automotive Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and it is proactively sharing information on vulnerabilities and cyber threats across the industry. This is an unprecedented step by any industry, proactively organizing ourselves well before any incident or regulatory pressure. We also are in the process of developing cybersecurity best practices to ensure as vehicles become more connected, the security of vehicle data and vehicle owners is protected as well. One of the most significant auto cybersecurity vulnerabilities results from unfettered access to vehicle computer systems. Global automakers and the auto manufacturers strongly support consumer rights to have their vehicles repaired at the repairer of their choice. In this spirit, all of the major automakers selling vehicles in the U.S. have entered into a memorandum of understanding agreeing to provide access in all 50 states to service, to do diagnostic work, and to repair information and tools necessary to service the vehicle, the same as any other franchised auto dealer. This includes the ability to electronically diagnose vehicles by accessing onboard diagnostic data stored on the vehicle, and at the same time, the industry approach to providing service information to the aftermarket must also recognize the need to protect consumers from third parties that would use vehicle data to hack into the computer systems or their vehicles. Automakers already provide as much information as possible for repair purposes while still maintaining and protecting the integrity of the in-vehicle software. That said, we are aware that some aftermarket parts suppliers and insurance companies have been lobbying policymakers to require automakers to disclose more and more information about proprietary systems behind the firewall. This issue clearly highlights the importance of balancing access to information, such as software used to repair a vehicle, with the need to maintain the security of critical vehicle systems. Finally, there are certain misconceptions about the ways in which our vehicles are collecting data and using data, and I would like to dispel a few of those, most notably with regard to event data recorders, or EDRs. EDRs are sometimes likened to black boxes in airplanes, but this is not accurate. EDRs are programmed generally to record in a continuous loop, writing over information again and again until a vehicle has been resulted in a front-end collision or another crash. And when that crash occurs with a strong enough impact, the device automatically saves 5 seconds of data from the immediately before, during, and after that incident. Based on federal regulations, if a vehicle does have EDR, it must track 15 specific data points, including speed, steering, braking, acceleration, seatbelt use, among others. In most states, including California, and now under federal law, EDR data is explicitly deemed the property of the vehicle owners and cannot be accessed except with the owner's consent, a court order for vehicle safety research, or when diagnosing, servicing, or repairing a vehicle. Let me close by saying that the automotive industry continues to develop innovative technologies and services that promise to deliver substantial benefits to the environment and enhancing the driver experience. Many of these technologies and services are based upon data generated and collected from a variety of vehicle systems, but consumer trust is essential. Mr. Tobin will explain how the industry created the privacy principles. We look forward to answering your questions, and we look forward to being here in California and working with each and every one of you on this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to note my co-chair is here, Senator Bell, who has said, go ahead, let's keep having the witnesses testify. We next have, I believe Mr. Tobin is going to speak next, and if you would just kind of hone in a little bit on some of the specifics here as well. Mr. Porter sort of set the table a little bit, anxious to see what the meal is. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, chairs and members. My name is Tim Tobin. I'm with Hogan Lovells in Washington, D.C., and I'm here to talk a bit about what the industry's been doing over the last couple of years. And automakers have long been responsible stewards of customers' information, but for a lot of the reasons Mr. Porter addressed, and you mentioned in your opening comments, there's been an evolution in the technologies that are being placed into vehicles. And vehicles are in many ways becoming more like computers on wheels. And in recognition of the various privacy concerns that these issues raise, in 2014, the two major trade associations, the Auto Alliance and Global Automakers, came together to create a set of privacy principles for vehicle technologies and services. The principles embrace well-established, fundamental, fair information practice principles, such as transparency, choice, data security, respect for context, data minimization, and accountability. And they draw from guidance that has been issued by the FTC, by the White House in its privacy report, and by best practices generally. All members of the respective trade associations signed on to these principles, which has created a fundamental baseline set of commitments. The members are certainly free to do more than what the principles require or contain, but they have brought the industry up to a certain level of expectations for what consumers can expect will occur with the handling of their information. Certainly, it is possible that, and we would expect that the automakers will be potentially competing on some of these issues in terms of privacy and the different options that they may be able to provide to customers. Each of the members who signed on to these principles were also reflecting the commitment by having the respective trade associations sent these principles over to the Federal Trade Commission's chair, and they acknowledged that by doing so, they were on the hook. If they were to violate these principles, it would potentially be an unfair or a deceptive trade practice under Section 5 of the FTC Act. So to talk about a little bit about what the principles address, they are focused on covered information as defined by the principles, which contains two types of data. The first type is identifiable information, which can be connected to both a vehicle or to a specific individual. So information like VINs, so it's tied to a vehicle, would be covered information. And it also has to be information that is collected, stored, used, or transmitted from the vehicle, or retrieved from the vehicle by the automakers. So for some information that might be being transmitted just between vehicles themselves without any pooling of that information, the principles do not cover that. There are also, they cover subscription information for services that consumers might individually sign up to. There are aspects of the privacy principles that go beyond what other self-regulatory codes have done in other industries, and in many ways we view these as particularly groundbreaking. For sensitive information types that Mr. Porter referenced, driver behavior, geolocation information, and biometrics, that information is subject to affirmative user opt-in consent before an automaker will use that information for marketing. It's also subject to affirmative opt-in consent before that information, those sensitive categories, will be shared with unaffiliated third parties for their own purposes. So, for example, this means that affirmative consent would be required before an automaker would share these sensitive categories of information with, for example, an insurance company.
Could I ask you, excuse me for interrupting, when does this affirmative consent, when is it requested? When the person buys the car along with the other 60 pages of information, or how does the automobile manufacturer seek that affirmative consent?
Yeah, it could be offered at a number of different instances in time, including when someone purchases the car. I do want to address the transparency principle, which is really a fundamental principle that underlies, it's probably the most important principle in the document, because for the specific categories we just referenced, the geolocation, biometric, and driver behavior information, there has to be more than just a standard privacy notice. There has to be clear, meaningful, prominent disclosure about how that information would use. And affirmative consent is defined as an action by the consumer in response to a clear, meaningful, and prominent notification. But it could occur at different times in the life cycle of an individual's interaction with the auto company or when they're purchasing a car. In terms of the other really groundbreaking steps, for geolocation information particularly, if the governmental entity is seeking access to that information, the automakers will require a warrant or court order before they would turn that information over, subject to some exceptions, such as exigent circumstances in an emergency scenario, or subject to specific regulatory authority that an entity like NHTSA might have for its safety mission. In addition, there's affirmative opt-in consent required when a company materially changes its privacy practices and applies those changes retroactively to information that's already been collected. I mentioned the notice principle, which requires that members commit to providing clear, meaningful notices to owners and registered users of vehicles about their collection, use, and sharing of covered information. with the notice of geolocation, biometrics, and driver behavior information being prominent. Companies can use any number of mechanisms for notice. There's no one-size-fits-all approach that's prescribed in these principles. There can be in-vehicle displays or hang tags. There could be user agreements, owner manuals. Those are all specific options. And again, these are designed to be baseline set of principles. Each company has to take these principles and operationalize them at their own company. So every company will be going back and has been going back because these took effect at the beginning of the year. They will be putting into place or have put into place specific practices, including having the requisite privacy notices in place. As to choice, as previously mentioned, there's the affirmative opt-in consent for sensitive categories of information, even for first-party marketing or sharing with third parties. Choice can otherwise be tied to a notice or subscription process, as long as it's provided consistent with the transparency principle. The principles also have a provision for respecting context in which a consumer interacts with an automaker.
Excuse me, Mr.
Yes,
Tobin,
sure.
Could you explain a little bit how choice comes into this, how it manifests itself with the consumer choosing these items? How does that, as a practical matter, occur?
So if there is, again, transparency is the fundamental principle that's embodied in these set of principles, and if a consumer is given notice of the information collection, use, and handling, then that can constitute choice when they make the decision to go forward and purchase the service or the vehicle, provided the choice has been set forth.